Good afternoon and most welcome to age 805. We are currently in Vårgårda in the cellar of ABF. This is a typical Swedish thing and is going to class after school, so to speak. Adults gather and they study a subject of some sort, and we have different groups or organizations that does that. And in this is a little village. There is at least 7 different, or used to be. And in Sweden, these also took political shape. So we are today with the left. And if you do a little look around here, you can see loads of red color. And I think that is to show we are on the left side. I think that's interesting. I didn't think of that first, but I was speaking the other day of divisions that actually are real, or more or less real, and how by doing superficial or artificial divisions we lose detail, we lose important stuff, so to speak. And of course, one of the most grave divisions is that between mind and body. It's wholly arbitrarily, and by doing it, we sort of block out a lot of reality for no good reason. There is no hypothesis behind the mind-body division, and that goes for most of these divisions. And just because nobody said or thought or did anything, they are almost impossible to discover or uncover, as I think Heidegger would call it. And these things we'll try to look at now. How can we sort of ease up these uncalled for divisions, these unhypothesized divisions or unassumed divisions that nobody invented, but we still sort of follow for being unconscious about them. So this could be an entering into consciousness. And for me it was important to realize once more topology. Topology does not ignore these assumed divisions. It takes care of them and look at them. And since topology is not the study of physics even, it's not limited to that, topology is the study of space, no matter what. And actually these days it's mostly used in economics, sociology, psychology even. Topology does not obey unassumed or unhypothesized rules. It tries to look at things from a more comprehensive perspective, for good reasons. They need it to be accurate. And I call this lecture Why Focal is Very Important. You can call that focal setting. And this is, of course, taken from the world of the camera. In a camera, you can change the focal setting back and forth, whereas you could actually call this division between mind and body. Today I will mostly discuss subject and object as sort of fixed position. And you can think of the camera getting some water. You are out in the woods, you get some water into the camera and it started to rust. And one day it's not movable anymore, and you forget that. That's exactly what happened. Sometime in history it got wet, it rusted, and it stayed that way, but it wasn't anybody's intention. So we should learn to realize focal setting can actually be changed. It's not cut in stone. Although, just because the reason nobody said it, we assume it's impossible to change. it feels like it's a part of reality. And maybe I had a sort of that insight when I was very little and I learned how a word was spelled. I was just previously discussing here with my colleague Kalle, and we were in a group of 30 young students, young pupils, and we all realized that the word newspaper in Swedish was spelled completely different from what we assumed it should be. And I and all of my fellow students, pupils, we were completely unaware of that. We were actually shocked how it could be different. One way of explaining the whole thing, we were in a certain dialectal area, unaware of it because we don't speak that much dialect and other things. And then, of course, the realization came as an absolute shock. After learning loads of spelling and everything being more or less correct, this was a deviation. And when it comes to pronunciation, it's more or less unassumed as well, something that just developed, not from human hand, not from an intention. This is similar. We can move. So I made a sort of graphic representation here, and you can think of the subject here and the object there. And we don't know why that division should be like this and nothing else. It is a lot of languages who doesn't do the division like this, and there is a lot of language that are actually much more flexible. I can introduce you to the subject by using a Japanese term which is omae. It means honorable in front of. O is an honorable word, means something, it's a prefix to show respect. Mae means in front of. But since they don't have this division, when we translate it to us, it could mean in front of the subject and could also mean in front of the object or the other speaker. So this could be translated in so many different ways. It could be me, it could be you, it could be unclear whether it's you and me. And when I say unclear, it's meant to be unclear because it doesn't fit the context otherwise. It's too much clarity if you say you or me. Goes for both in a way. It could be either or, one of the people, and it can also be both. All these positions are possible translations, but when you do translation, especially in some cases, you lose. It's not correct anymore. You lose a little bit or a lot. And I've been trying to painstakingly translate from Japanese to Swedish once upon a time, and it was gut-taking. It was very tough. What I do in the end is rewrite the book, because we can't really, you can't tell the story the same way. It's just impossible. You can also have more positions. I think it's fair to say this is coming from here and there. Should be T here to be more English. This is a two-partitive system here and there. But there is a lot of languages, actually the majority I would say, has three positions. Here, there, and not here and not there. Sort of. This is called a so do system in Japanese. And as you can see, that doesn't hold at all. And this is making it even more problematic to translate to Swedish, English, or French, or whatever Western language. So The division or the invention and subject and objects are arbitrarily random. It's not taken from a reality, and it's cut in stone. In that way, nobody invented it, just happened to be that way. We didn't mean to. You can see a lot of problems here, a lot of lack of knowledge that comes from blindly accepting something nobody made up. That's one of the most pertinent reasons why this is so problematic. As another thing, we can also move in between here. We can make the distance different. We can come closer and we can come further away. This is also not allowed in Western language. The distance seems to be the same. Not too close, not too far. Somewhere in between, which of course also vary a bit between language to language. This, if you want to translate it correctly, leads to immeasurable problems. I don't want to translate anything from Japanese. Well, Korean, Chinese for that matter, and Sanskrit, I won't even go into. And I would say this division maybe is one of the most knowledge-killing divisions there ever existed, because it takes away so much. And of course, this has to do with localization, and localization is immensely important. You need to know where you are, otherwise your whole body system will tense. And whereas tension in flexible language is not so much in the language, neither so much in the body, we have tension both in language and in body, because they go hand in hand. Because what this system does is that they obliterate the possibility for me to localize where am I situated. I need to know where I am. And with this automatic division, that doesn't, well, usually doesn't fit the situation. Could be a situation that fits, but that chance, then I should be happy, it did fit. But all those cases where it doesn't fit, it's very problematic. And Ian McGilchrist also mentioned this. This is a development after the Iliad and the Odyssey. It wasn't the case. We didn't have this cut in stones division from the beginning. The development of object and subject is a fairly modern one. And it took away loads of information that we used to have in language and impoverished language considerably. It was very hard to express things that were more fluid, flexible, and they didn't fit the purpose. And it's an interesting thing. Homer mentioned these things indirectly a lot of times. Language is changing. It doesn't have the same tonality it has before. It's just an impoverishment. Ian McGilchrist also mentioned the definite article as such a thing. The making of the definite article took away a lot of precision in language. Something became definite, and after that it was definite and nothing else. And it could also turn into sort of a reified thing for everyone. And there you go, in the end you end up in the cave of ideas into significant problems. And of course, this is the start of 60, 70 years of misgoing in perception theory, because this was lying underneath. It was in language, in our culture, and when we started to think about perception, starting to make a perception theory, that lingered on. And it was assumed until 15 years ago that I get information into my eyes, into my sensory system, and then I make a representation in my head. It's completely wrong. It's not that way. And that's because this division was never allowed to be a hypothesis. Nobody said, when I speak, or when I talk, or when I do assumption, this is already in the bottom. And just because nobody pointed it out, it was like a hole in the ground. A hole in the ground with no markers and with no warning signs. You are bound to have people falling into that hole. And this is exactly what happened in Western development. Japanese, once more, they don't have definite article. None of the Asiatic language. Sanskrit has to some degree, but none of the other Asiatic languages don't have definite article. But they have other things that are incredibly much more important, like topic. And topic is very hard to work without. Korean people who get adjusted to Western language always feel immensely handicapped because they can't tell topic. In Western languages, we don't care about topic, and that leads to problems, which actually Asian people recognized, because we cannot transfer as much information we need. The language doesn't allow it, or the holes are not marked, and therefore you fall into them. Gibson came to change this, and he said, let's start with affordances instead. And we came to a solution. And nowadays, we are no longer hindered in the science of cognition or linguistics for that, artificial intelligence for that matter either. And I think one of the reasons for the development went so quick there is because there is money involved. We cannot ignore reality when we need to make a profit. And, of course, technical development, that's very important. Another subject that questioned that what came 1927, and that was quantum mechanics. This does not fit quantum mechanics. It doesn't fit reality. In quantum mechanics, you have a floating division here. And sometimes you do the division completely differently. And once again, we have this slicing of the whole thing. And I would say until quantum mechanics, the marginalized thing was actually the subject, oddly enough. Used to be the object, but it came to be the subject. And that's another problem. With this very hard division, we usually just turn over. And that's very typical for Western culture, changing direction constantly. And that makes for no perseverance. We do not persevere anymore. Every new moment we change because we found our whole knowledge in something that can turn into the opposite. Because, well, we discussed this earlier, when we talk about truths too much, we forget it's dependent on falsehood in the West. And therefore, it could always go over to the other side. And that puts big deficiency into thinking and language as well. You can never be certain of anything. It's better to have a movability, so you can change the whole thing according to circumstance and intention. And you could see more of the subject side. You can take care of that more. For instance, when you go to a lunch restaurant around the corner here, it's better to make the division more in the area of yourself. What do you want to have for lunch? And not so much about the restaurant, the object. So you do the division differently. And you don't do as a friend of mine who asks constantly, what do you recommend for lunch? Almost like, what is more convenient for you to serve me? Most restaurant owners don't like that if they're not very, very sloppy. They will say, at shop, of course, that's the cheapest one, pea soup. So, and of course, this has also led to the idea that the prioritization of the object had led to that we also today, most of us, except science, I'd say, think that we are made of objects somehow, material stuff. And I think that went very deeply into the church as well. I was looking at a discussion that's going on. One of the Swedish bishops, we have 18, 24, I don't remember, 16 maybe. One of the Swedish bishops has lost his authority. He's no longer a bishop, he's no longer a priest, he's not even a helping assistant, and never will be again. And there come up a discussion regarding the church. And somebody said, what would it take to be having to leave the Swedish church? And he made a question. Well, maybe if you believe in God, that'd be enough to having to leave the church. I didn't respond to that. That was a bit too brutal for my taste. But there is a point there he has. The top clerics of the Swedish state church, they have actually completely accepted that we are made of material stuff. And they think the soul as more of a metaphor for something you really wish. And you see, you get further and further away from your own intention. If you want to survive, you need a soul and all that, and other stuff as well. But this division still holds outside of science. It doesn't within science, though. And these peoples, the high clerics of the Swedish church, they say they believe in science. There is a bit problematic there. I think we have a work to do, Kalle. And isn't it odd? All we have to do is tell people about science. Well, yeah, that's it. We need to understand as well. We were talking about tachyons yesterday, and when you get into small material things, you note, and this is coming from Roger Penrose, I think one of those most authoritarian physicists today, and he noted intentional attitudes among quarks, for instance. Quarks are one of the building stones of atoms, and obviously this division doesn't hold them. You see, almost like group behavior in very small things. According to this division, that shouldn't be there. So it's a division that's very problematic, and it leads to friction, I would say, because you need to uphold it every day. As soon as you wake up in the morning, you have to start think in very strict categories. You have to think you're a subject and you're looking at the object world. That in itself causes you to strain your eyes. Already by that. People who don't have that sharp division, it's more about the sharpness, they tend to look at the world in a more lenient, flexible way. Whereas Westerners really look for the objects. I'm a subject here, I'm situated somewhere, I don't know where, maybe in the origo or everywhere at the same time. And I'm looking at the objects. I had a schoolmate who was teasing me when I was in China, and he thought Westerners looked really odd with these really sharp eyes all the time. Why do you have those eyes? What is it? I think we're looking for something. And I didn't know at the instance what it was. Now I do. We were looking for the objects. And imagine the strain of having to tense your eyes the whole day and your whole bodily system to uphold this unrealistic assumption. You can't let it go. You can't be open for other possibilities. It's a little bit like somebody told you can only walk with the left leg and you have to jump around like this. And what happened here is everybody did that, and they did it for thousands of years. And in the end, we all do it. And what I'm asking, why? Why do we do it? Because it's not coming from science anymore, that's for sure. It gives a more encompassing, comprehensive knowledge if we are being a bit more flexible. What we can do, we can move the difference, we can make the difference differently according to each and every moment of our lives. And the more we do that, the more we will gain skill in doing it. We get more advanced in doing that. We lose out on a lot of learning when we don't understand that this doesn't have to be this way. You can also have a gradual change. You can gradually go from something being completely subjective to something subjective. And you can give a taste of subjectivity to things outside. We do that occasionally. If you go to an art gallery, of course you don't leave your subjectivity outside. You don't look at a painting and say, oh, I like that. That's 50 centimeters high and 45 centimeters in width. How much do you want? It perfectly fits my living room. Would you be willing to sell it to me after you measured it properly? Well, those things you don't say. It's bad etiquette if you don't understand it. But you put a lot of your subjectivity into your painting. You feel for it. You go into it. And you make the division differently. You're still not the same as the painting. Well, maybe in your life you can find a painting and you can be the same as the painting. You can have intimacy to the highest degree. And this is good, because this is one of the uses of this Omar, is to say that we are the same. Maybe you're talking to someone and you say we are the same. It doesn't really mean, it's hard to explain, doesn't really mean you like the person. It means we are the same in some way. And in certain instances it's a perfect use. Maybe you have the same taste, gusto for life, something in that vicinity. It's extremely hard to translate. But once you're in the situation, you have this more floating. It's very apt. It was used in a movie, two Japanese soldiers were fighting side by side, and then they used Omai in one instance. And then it makes sense there, because they share the same square and did the same thing. Another thing that happens once you understand you can all do these things, you'll be able to predict a future behavior in the world. This is a little bit like going into a boat, and you're really anxious to go into the boat. You packed all your bags, you need some food, you're going to make a barbecue on some island somewhere, maybe in the Gothenburg archipelago. It's a lovely area, and I've gone loads of times myself. And you jump into the boat and off you go, and then you realize, oh I forgot to take the bearings, where I'm leaving, what position did I leave? Well, today that's not a problem, but it used to be a big problem. Think about how it used to be. If you don't have your bearings, if you go out, you don't know where you are on the map. And for every little bit you travel with the boat, you will lose your bearings even more. You get more and more out of course, because you don't know where to put your little spot on the map. This is a little bit like that, because you can't take your bearings here. You can't localize. This is why they abandoned this in quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics needs to be more exact. And this is the same that happens in your life. You lose a little bit. When you wake up, you're fresh and alive, and then you lose a little bit. You try to uphold it, you tense yourself to uphold it, but you also lose where you're going in life. The planning, the understanding gets a little by little more and more skewed. And In Japanese, they talk about people who becomes otaku. It's the same o honorific, could be anyway, and they add taku. Otaku. That's a person that gets stuck somewhere, and instead of going back to port to get your bearings so you can start all over again and you can make your adjustments, you have your balance, they get worse and worse. They get stuck. And this otaku, it means honorable roof or honorable house. Can you imagine where they stop their journey?
Nowhere.
Well, nowhere or at home. They stay at home. They don't leave home. And they call these people otaku. They get down into something and they just don't leave their home. In Japan, you don't have to leave your home because you can order out, as we learned to do here in Sweden the last 30 years. Ordering food to the house. It's been a thing in Japan for 300 years. So you can always have food delivered to your house, drinks, all sort of toilet paper, whatever you need, clean clothes, so you don't need to leave your house. And they actually get afraid of leaving the house because you don't have the bearing anymore. And that's a very unusual phenomenon in Japan. I'd say in the West, this fear is very common. We fear for a good reason. We don't have our bearings. We don't know where anything is going, and whatever we sign up for, that can change. And that builds for not building a sustainable future. I really get serious. This is really bad, because how can you trust something that is so willy-nilly? Bound to change in every direction because of the wind or anything like that. It doesn't give you any safety in the journey of your life, to take the metaphor from the boat trip. It doesn't give any safety. And this is exactly this lack of safety we have today. Whatever you sign up for, it won't hold anymore. It's not safe. It's not stable. You can't trust it, because it can change the next day or in 10 years. It's like the whole organization is ruled by Bertrand Russell. He changed 20 times in his lifetime. Thank God he didn't have any followers. Well, he did indirectly, but they need to change their mind all the time. There's no trust in this system, because since there is no direction, there is no boatsman, there is no captain, there's no nothing. It's just simple happenstance and whatever can happen. And in the end, the ship might come to its proper destination, but you don't know that. And of course, you get very unsafe because of this. So, one thing one can think about this, and this is my first take on Derrida when I began to learn about Derrida. And I was actually thinking about art writing or arche writing, and where he said that writing is really the good thing, the prioritized thing. And writing actually is the origin of speaking. And I love that. I thought it was a reversal. But it's more to, I realized by age, it's more to sort of flexible this division, to make it more flexible, more floating, not as sharp. And this is the first step. Reversal is the first step, maybe, to lean it in your head. As long as you do it at home, and you don't go out shouting against talking. Don't talk, or something like that. Which they are actually doing in the United States, especially Greenboro University in Oregon. That's the worst case scenario. So it is not really a reversal, because this you can't reverse, because it's just a fantasy in a way. It's just something that gets stuck. But to reverse the fantasy, it could actually make you question the fantasy, and it can make it disappear in some ways. Imagine you have a child at home, and the child comes back home and is sad. What? Schoolmate of mine told me about this ghost who's living in the cellar in our house. You can do two ways. You can either say there's no ghost, or you can say, yes, I saw the ghost, but I took the vacuum cleaner and I vacuumed it away. And the second thing is much better with the child. To say there is no ghost, the child will suspect you're lying or something like that. To fully accept the whole thing and say, do the reversal, it's even better to suck the, then you don't have to go into ontology with the child. It's very helpful. And I think this reversal also happened within the clerics. We're going to stay into the subject of the Swedish church, I think, just to put in some of those things. Today, to be a believer God used to be the subject, we were the objects, and reversal obviously happened, which has always happened. Now God is an object that the subject believes in. And there is a great distance there. So to be a believer today is a little bit like being Hugh Everett and say that in another world there is an object called God. And I say that exists. And then you meet up with another person, Hugh Everett like, and that person will say, I don't think that that object in the other world exists. And then you have a quarrel. But in reality, the difference between the two sides are not much. It's the same unassumed division, that same unassumed distance as well. I have a story for that. I often go to a Greek village in Macedonia, and I usually have a word with the cleric there, and he mentioned once upon a time he met up with a kaplan, and he was greatly surprised because the kaplan did a great thing about that he believed in God, and he felt it would be very odd. It's not something you usually mention in Greece like that. It's almost unheard of. But he made a great point of a little bit Hugh Everett point that object somewhere in another world exists. And the cleric was like, this what? What do you mean? For the cleric in the village, it was about doing things, actual things, like helping people, helping oneself, helping one's family, doing liturgy, doing the ceremonies, doing the daily things, getting things done. And also into the future, because that church is going to stay for another 1,000 years. And he also often mentions this has been put to the test recently. They were more or less exterminated. Half of the village population were killed off in the 1920s because they persisted in believing in what they believed, keeping their doings, keeping their ceremonies, to doing their things. And that helps, he said. Although it's also awful, that helps to keep that thing now. Otherwise, maybe they wouldn't have done it today. And he said something really wise, that there is no happiness without adversity. Then you cannot stick to what is truly good. You're going to be willy-nilly. But his main point, it was, poor Kaplan, he didn't have anything of what I had. I had all the daily doings. All in my whole reality is pointing to the same way, including my own body. But he only had a tiny, weeny little idea And that was all he's had. That was all. No wonder he was clinging to it like a scared child at night. He had nothing to hold on to. And of course this man was acutely nervous. He had fear in his face, the cleric said about the Kaplan. So this is the modern times, and they don't see the reasons for it. But one of the reasons is, of course, we've been living in stability. And for some reason, when people are living in stability for a long time, we tend to go into what we are accustomed to. And this custom we think is good, but it's not. It's like making an inflation. And the cleric, he didn't think there was any difference between this person who said he was a believer and an unbeliever, because none of them did anything. 99% of the day he didn't do anything. And actually, he was actually implying reality doesn't exist. So you can do whatever you want, as long as you keep that fort. And the cleric finally asked the Kaplan, have you always been like this? And I said, I had 20 years when I really doubted this existed. So you see the problem. There's nothing left at all. And this is a new development. It's something that I think progressed because of the stability we have in the world. People might say, well, we had the Second World, First World War, but they were also so short. And it came back to normal with a very short span. And therefore, we haven't tested the things that we actually believe in. And that somehow is almost like the trees. If there is no wind, it gets softer and softer. In the end, the tree falls. We need something to corrode us, to impinge us and make our convictions stronger. Because otherwise, it becomes too willy-nilly. It becomes it doesn't hold the same power. And it also means you don't get the same amount of happiness within. You don't get confidence. You don't have anything to trust, to put your foot down. You don't have a stable position in the world. And this is quite terrifying. And either you go in the way of Max Tegmark. I mentioned this one for Georgius, was his name of the cleric, to think that there is another world somewhere else and where all the opportunities are, but we can't talk about it, we can't touch it. And I remember Georgius, he just looked at me and he just shook his head. Oh my God, poor fellow, he's really lost. Max Tegmark, I can add, is a compatriot of us, half Swede, half American. And he says that there are other worlds somewhere, but we can never know about them. We can never have any contact with them. But he firmly believes in them. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't really matter. As long as there is a distance, you don't have any connection to it. It's like being 10 kilometers from the painting in the art gallery and you shout or you told her by telephone, I really like that painting. I can't really discern it, but I think I see the town where the gallery is. I buy it. The distance doesn't matter. There is no intimacy in this conviction, and in the end we just put labels on things and we say something. We don't have to. We can open up. And one of the subjects that really opens my eyes was topology, because in topology we care about that. It's something that is very important and it needs to be stated. If you do this difference, please tell me why you do it so we can put that into the equation. That needs to be into the equation. And this is all I ask for. If you do this sharp division, tell you why you do it. And that also comes into why do you put something in a certain order. You need to have a rule and you need to state that rule, because that's included in the whole thing of reality. It's not outside. The order is also important. Of course, this magic hand of Darren Brown or another magician, he doesn't want you to observe the order, how it's done, because that's supposed to be hidden. How otherwise would you believe in the card trick? Because look away from the hand that's doing it. The order is immensely important here, and it tends to be ignored. That you first divide, you don't start to prioritize. First you divide, then you prioritize, and then you marginalize. It's always in that order. And just by disclosing that order, you have a magnificent tool that you can keep for the rest of your life. Thanks to Jacques Derrida and also in some certain Martin Heidegger. It's very helpful, and it's bound to give you balance in your world once more. It's going to give you direction so you can find your port or your destination. And that's for sure. You can learn that directly from topology or quantum mechanics. They are all the same. And I think that's just about enough for today. I wish you a really pleasant afternoon and say until next time, bye-bye.
Thank you.